everybody, and welcome to this month's JetForce lesson with our friend Ken Huizenga. Ken's going to teach us today about operators, doing best practices with spot, UV, and tactile clear coats. So no foils, none of that stuff. We're really talking about all the clear stuff in today's lesson. Ken, how you doing, buddy?
I'm great. How are you, Kevin?
Good, good. Are you enjoying March Madness, my friend, or like I might be here in the background, or
Absolutely. My pool depends on the Gators winning it all. So let's. I'll
uh,
even go Gators all the way down here from Wildcat Country. So
that makes me so happy right there. So Ken, let's talk a little bit about spot UV and tactile. I think that's kind of the first digital embellishment that came out on the jet varnishes. First off, what are your thoughts on spot UV and tactile? Is it something that you used to push a lot, or were you mostly doing a foil, or was it 50-50 split? Where did you spend most of your time when you were running embellishments?
if we really go back in time, I think the biggest reason that we started an embellishment was because of the customer's request for spot UV. Right. So it didn't even have anything to do with tactile when we first got started looking at the equipment. But as we moved on, it was like, great, now we can do spot UV, which, you think about is really difficult before you would have to get a cyro plate, or you would have to do some pretty snazzy stuff with aqueous coating. And so you needed this machine to be able to do this and do it quick and inexpensive. So that was the start of it. And then, as time moved forward, we saw the response and what tactile product actually did to consumer response rates. And then it kind of grew from there. So it's the core of embellishment, and I think it's what makes the embellishment process the most exciting. So being able to do that on digital printed product was a real breakthrough, and customers love it.
Well, I think you even had if I'm my mind is let's see, you had a mascot, if I'm not mistaken. And what was the name of that mascot that you had for your embellishment?
It was Spot. We called it Spot, like going back to third grade or first grade, see Spot run, see Spot do all these wonderful things and create these great products. So it was an interesting way to make it obvious what we were up to, right? We weren't, embellishment can be a word that can include a lot of different things. So that was I thought a very simple yet elegant way of showing what we could do as a company.
You know what? I think actually, if I go in my samples kit right now, I still have that postcard of C Spot Run that you guys did when you first got that machine all those years ago.
Yeah, it was great to be able to do a lunch and learn with customers and to show exactly what we did with that logo. So that was pretty cool.
I love it. I love it. So talk to me about some of the things that you learned running, Spot UV and obviously Tactile. What were some of like the key technical lessons that you guys had to learn? Maybe the easy way, likely the hard way, in production.
Yeah, I think it starts. I mean, at the beginning, you really have to take a look at the design. A lot of the problems and gotchas can be stopped if you look early. So it behooves an operator to open up that file that they were given, look at things like sheet size, make sure your file matches the sheet size, make sure the elements all make sense. You don't want to see a sentence with one letter in the middle of a sentence that ended up with embellishment. You want to make sure things make sense. You don't want to be putting varnish on very small type, on very small details. Got to remember that when you're talking varnish, you want it to show. You want it to be the center of attraction. You want it to catch the eye. You want to bring varnish to the elements that talk about your call to action on the piece that you're printing. You really want to draw the eyes in. They like to go to shiny and sparkly, and that's where you want to go. So open that file and take a look at it. It should make sense to the operator. You don't want to go, why are they doing this or why are they doing that? You can head that off long before you even have to do the run, right? While you're running another machine or you're running another digital device, open your files for the next day or the day that you're going to work later that day, and take a look at stuff, because it can be important to get those files fixed sooner than later, and your customer's going to end up thanking you in the long run because they're going to probably say the same thing you are. This does not make sense. So I think that's important. And then, when you open your file, there's going to be things that are going to have varnish that maybe you're not going to want varnish on later. You're going to scan that sheet and you're going to want to make sure that your file registers perfectly. So things like crop marks and bolt and targets, you're going to have varnish on those. Leave it on. Go ahead and run a sheet. Use it to expand your file or stretch your file or skew it in a direction that makes sure that it fits perfectly. You're going to eventually want to take those things off, and I'll explain why in a second. But sometimes it's even helpful to shut your scanner off and run a blank sheet of paper. Run the blank sheet of paper, take a look at all the elements, make sure they look good, make sure you haven't wasted a printed sheet yet. Make sure all your heads are firing and that you have no imperfections. Then you can go back after you run your test sheets and you've taken a good hard look at it and go ahead and remove crop marks. Varnish can be pricey, so you want to take off that varnish off those marks. You want to take off varnish off of too much bleed. Sometimes you got files that have an 1/8 inch bleed, that's fine. Go ahead and leave the varnish there. But if you've got files that got a 1/2 inch of bleed, which some customers, if they're doing the file, they'll leave that much extra over. Not so bad when it comes to toner, not that bad of a waste. But if you're putting varnish on a 1/2 inch all the way around beyond the crop marks, that really adds up quick. So go ahead and draw yourself a stroke and pull that stuff out of the way and leave it at a 1/16. You really don't need any more than that. It also provides a very lumpy sheet for cutting. So
that's definitely something I want to get into is, what is the best way to cut this stuff? Because especially when you have tactile effects and finishes, you get a lot of warping going on in that pile. So if you're running, a significant number of sheets in that job, what were some of the things that you found work best to then finish it afterwards?
Well, if their pre-press operators are really great, they can make a gradient that takes that down to the edge and sort of fans it down from, let's say, 60 microns down to 30 microns, or even invisible to that point where you're almost at nothing when you get past beyond the crop mark. That's really helpful. But, you're going to put a lot of varnish on it. That's the purpose of the machine. Just a lot of things that you have to think about before you even get to cutting, right? Because it's got your varnish has got monomers, it's got dryers, it's got photo initiators. All these products are inside the varnish, and you got a couple of dryers in your machine, and you're gonna set that varnish, and then you're gonna cure that varnish. But when you hear the word cure, don't be fooled. It is not cured when it gets to the end of your machine.
Right.
So you've got it about 90% cured. But if you were to take 2 of those sheets right over to your guillotine cutter, and you were to drop a clamp on it, I guarantee it would stick. It would ruin the product. So you got to think about how much you're putting down. You have to think about the fact that it's not 100% cured, and then you have to think about how you're going to store the product while it dries. So if you haven't already heard this as operators, take that sheet of paper, even though it goes against everything you've ever heard, and stand that fanned pile of paper on its side. We would take a couple of masonite boards and we had a rack, and we would slide the stuff in sideways on end, and during the day we would just continually to fan out those sheets and get air in between it, because you cannot put, just like wet print, you have to think back to old offset. If you put too high of a pile, it'll actually brick and it'll stick.
Yeah, so I know a couple people who used to put like those portable AC units with little fingers that would blow cold air into the pile as the sheets were coming out. And those were especially helpful for people who lived in places where, probably like yours, where it was super hot during the summer. And you had really, that temperature really made a big change. You talked about monomers, and you talk about photo initiators that tend to go a little yellow with time. What are your thoughts about using either spot or tactile onto like white elements on the sheet?
I think if you have a choice and you can freshly open a bottle for products like that, that's going to be best. I found when I opened fresh varnish, it was really clear.
Really?
So So, and then over time, I mean, you put it in a dark cabinet. Hopefully you put your cap on tight. Everything, all the tubing inside the machine is black. You're hiding it from light as much as possible. But you're as an operator, you're putting under a lot of pressure because you don't want to run out of varnish. You want to
Right.
order plenty. It does have an expiration date. It
Right.
has an expiration date when it leaves the factory. So if it goes to KM, for instance, and KM has it for a month or two, then you get it. Then you store it for a couple of months. You're opening a fresh bottle of varnish that could be up to 6 months old already. And so for projects where you're going to actually put it on white or you're going to put it on a very light color, get to it right away. And I believe it or not, it goes against the grain, but I've gotten product that is near its expiration date, whether it just be lost in the shuffle or in the process. I won't accept it.
Yeah.
So as an operator, you got to decide whether or not you'll accept it. But
Right.
I guarantee the fresher that varnish is, the clearer it will be.
Incredible. I had never put two and two together. That's really fascinating, Ken.
So yeah, I mean, you use it fresh and use it quick, and store it. Make sure that cabinet is not left open in the back.
Right.
Make sure it's closed and that it's dark, because that anything that starts to initiate the process, which is I'm sure why you asked the question.
Right.
Um, yeah, you want to do that.
So a lot of people, when it comes to spot and it comes to tactile effects, we tend to see, I think the market prefers high contrast, right? So we know spot and tactile is going to be super glossy, and a lot of people like to laminate. I think we've seen a lot of matte lamination go on, especially soft touch is a very popular one. What are some of the things that you think operators should be aware of when it comes to putting that spot UV onto like a soft touch lamp or something like that? I know that there's curling issues depending on how quickly you're running your laminates. And I know that sometimes some laminates will spread the varnish out, others will pull it in. Like, what have you seen? What can people really take from your experience?
Well, I think as we've talked about in the past, a dine level is very important.
Right.
So if you don't have a set of dine pens as an operator, you should get it, because you're going to be presented. That sales staff is going to go out and push some really random paper, and they're going to think, hey, this is fancy, let's do it. Well, there's a lot of things that lend themselves well to this process and things that don't. So get a dine pen, make sure you're in that correct dine range. But what you said couldn't have been put really any better. I always tended to lean toward matte or dull coated stocks. I
Mm,
think they provide the most bang for the buck. You really want to see that contrast. You want to see that gloss just pop from the page. And having that background that's dull lends itself to a dramatic result. And I think that the soft touch laminates that are out today, they provided a lot of cutting and bindery issues in the past, and it didn't always want to stick to toner. I think a lot of that's gone by the wayside, but putting on soft touch laminate is just the bomb. It's probably the best. It's the best application that I've ever seen, and it also has a great dine level. It dries great. It sticks well. The fine print goes where you put it, but it lends itself to kind of an expensive product. So you're talking about super upscale, and but laminate too. You don't just want anybody in your shop putting laminate on paper, because you start to put too much pressure on that laminate and you stretch it. By the time it gets cut or burst, you're looking at could be a U-shaped product before you even get it to.
right. That's a big issue, right? Like a big part of I remember like how do operators combat curl, and I think that's a lot of it is how are you laminating this stuff, and also what we found was what type of laminate we're using. So there's nylon based laminates which have a lot of different holes in it, so the heat can escape these little micro holes, and so you're not getting that much of a curl. uh, but would you agree that the curl is probably the biggest challenge when it comes to running a laminate?
It is, and also it lends itself to the better laminates, give you less curl. And
Really?
probably dropping names is probably not great, but I use a lot of Lux laminate. That stuff is fantastic. But a lot of machines can cut the laminate, and then there's some that burst the laminate where you just put pressure on it. So you need to be involved as a as an embellishment operator, you need to kind of step back and take a look at who's doing your work and talk about some of these things that will help it stay flat. Because I think we could have a whole episode on what you got to do to try and get curl product through an inkjet embellishment device. You got to remember, you're talking about the heads being only a mil over the sheet. You do not have a lot of room for error. So it actually let's get back to substrate a little bit too. You need to even take care of your substrate. I was a real stickler about not opening reams of paper until it was ready to print and damn near ready to embellish. Because you don't want paper. If you go into the back and you do a ream, you're going to print the job. You're going to grab a ream of sealed up paper, and you're going to grab the 100 overs for the job off the shelf from a ream that was open 2.5 weeks ago. You're going to wonder why suddenly everything changed. You're going to put that through a digital printing device. You're going to heat it up. The fresh paper is going to react one way. The stuff that's half dried out is going to react another way. You're going to wonder why you have to skew the image for the digital device that you're doing embellishment with differently because the paper's changing on you, and you're going to be wondering why. And it's just your habits that you need to have before you even start the embellishment process are much different, and you need to be, as a shop, aware that you need to have control on these things. Because the other thing I like to do is not, if at all possible, don't order parent size cut sheets. Don't order 2335 or 2840 and then cut it down. Right now you're opening the edges of the sheet in two different directions. You're cutting 8 out of a big sheet. It all is shrinking and acting differently. And by the time you get it, all digital devices now use some sort of heat. Either you're fusing toner, you're heating the blanket on a indigo, you're running it on an offset press that's using IR heat. I know it kind of gets away from the varnish, but it's just all these little housekeeping things that can make your embellishment process and your varnish so much better, so much easier, take away a lot of the errors that could potentially happen.
That's a great point. So Ken, another question for you. I was just at Print UV and I was on a panel. Somebody asked me this question. Is they want to run two-sided tactile or spot UV. But the issue they're getting is they're getting a lot of, like you said, blocking. If you have a job that has like two-sided UV, what would be some of the tips and tricks you would recommend to be able to run that job, I think, adequately, if possible? If it's not possible, that's another question altogether. But
It can be done and done successfully. If you have the choice, run the first side in the morning and the second side in the afternoon. That 4 hours can make a big difference in a shift or a second shift. You can also run your second set of IR or UV lamps at a much higher intensity. So you might run them at 50% on a normal job because that works well and everything seems to be carrying fine. But you're talking about doubling up the technical issues it could potentially have. So go ahead and turn those secondary dryers up and then cool it, like you said. Put it in a cool room. I was fortunate enough to have a closet that I kept humid and cool. If you can do that, that's great because it will bring that temperature down. That varnish will begin to harden a lot quicker. And then you can pull it back out of the dark closet. You think you're going to store things in a closet, but it's a great place for foil, and it's a great place for drying of embellished product.
Mark.
So go ahead and turn those up, and then like I said, I can't stress it enough. Stand the stuff up on end because the weight is what's keeping your product blocking. So stand it up on end, fan it, go get a cup of coffee, come back, fan it again, continue your run and fan it again. It takes seconds, but you just keep bringing in fresh air. You get rid of the VOCs, you get rid of everything that comes out of varnish, and you should really be okay running the second side. And obviously if you can do it, if one side only has 40 microns, one's got 100 or 200 microns, obviously run the side with 1 or 200 microns second.
So it's funny because I wrote it down. That was my next question is when you say stand it up, like I've seen a lot of shops build like almost racks, like almost cubby hole racks, like from that IKEA stuff, where instead of basically, putting them like this, the sheets would all be like vertical. What did you do? Did you build a rack or did you just stand them up or did you figure something out to get them to dry?
We had, it was very, I don't know, maybe it was just I had gotten lucky. We had carts that were 20 years old, and they had shelves that were made out of masonite wood that was really
Yeah.
thin.
Yeah.
And in between the sides, there were these metal rods that separated the front from the back. So you could slide the shelves together, and in the middle were a bunch of rods. So what I did was I would take the sheets, I would stand them up, I would put them between the two metal rods, and I would take the two sheets of masonite and also put them between those rods because that would keep the sheets flat.
Right.
So you have to be super, I know I'm super anal and people might not do that, but you really have to think about how to keep them flat too, because when you stand sheets up on end, then they start to buckle, right?
Right.
They start to get U-shaped. So get a masonite board, cut yourself 16 boards out of each piece of masonite. You're talking about maybe $50 worth of wood. And then it's up to you to figure out what the best way is. You could actually stand them up on the floor against a wall if you have a corner, right? Put a board, stand the ream up on end, put another board, stand the ream up on end. Just if you think about it, the weight is on the side of the sheet, so you don't have weight actually pressing wet varnish to wet varnish. So that's kind of a key.
I love it. I love it.
You did mention before about cutting, and I didn't really get to that point. If your company is dependent on guillotine cutters, which most people are, you really want product to wait 24 hours. You're going to want to wait 24 hours. You're going to want to turn your clamp pressure way down. You're going to want to get one of those old carbonless magnetic pads that you could put on the bottom of the clamp, and you want to use as little pressure as possible. And then you're talking about maybe only cutting 50 to 100 sheets at a time because you're going to end up with a very wavy pile and you're going to drop that clamp very gently and you're going to cut. And if you're really careful, you're going to be able to use a guillotine cutter. Is it the best way? Absolutely not. If you are going to get into digital embellishment, you need to be thinking single sheet cutting devices like Duplo's machine or like Standard Horizon's machine, or a table cutter, right? You got a Zund or whatever, Esco, or whatever brands are out there of those. Um, if you're cutting one sheet at a time, you're just taking away all your issues.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about pressure. You don't have to worry. You can actually, I hate to even say it because if owners hear this, you can probably get some of the jobs out the door the same day if you have a single sheet cutting system. But to be great at this, I think knowing you're going to potentially add foil, you're going to add a second side, you're going to add additional elements to stocks that you don't even know how things are going to cure. It just takes away so many gotchas that it's worth investing in for sure. You could even, okay, here you go, right? Yeah, it's a lot of money. As an owner, your operator could literally be, if you position it properly, feeding 100 sheets off of the JetForce into the single sheet slitting device. You don't need a second operator, and the stuff is coming out cut.
Right.
So think about that when you're thinking about trying to fit embellishment jobs into your cutting system. You're cutting off your offset press as you guys are going crazy, getting lots and lots of product out, and now they have to stop for this little embellishment job. So it is lean and it is efficient to have a single sheet cutting device. I could probably write a whole paper on proving the ROI on that.
That's fascinating stuff. Well, Ken, I wanted to thank you very much for this wonderful lesson today on spot UV and tactile. I think you've answered all of my questions. Is there anything else that you think that maybe we left out, or is there any like words of wisdom that you would tell to people who might be either new to this or running this type of equipment for the first time?
No, just remember you're dealing with a live product, right? You're talking about a UV curable varnish. It's alive. It's alive when you're it's in the jar. It's alive when you're putting it out on the sheet. And even when everybody claims it's cured, it's still kind of alive. So you just need to be aware of that. And I think if you are and you treat it with the respect it deserves, it's going to provide with fantastic results and a super profitable product.
It's alive. Well, listen, I wanted to thank you very much for a wonderful session on spot UV and textures. Join us next month, guys. Next month is going to be all about personalization and variable data embellishment. That's going to be the theme for next month. But we are finishing up spot UV March, and we thank you enormously for obviously your experience and willing to share with all of us everything that you've learned in your years running your MGI. So thank you very much, Ken. And guys, we will see you soon. Thank you.